there's been a lot of talk about the appearance of Yemeni coffee beans, and I know that we have the SCA protocol for green. These are natural coffees, largely speaking, they're not washed. A lot of the protocols were perhaps established, Marty, and I'm going to start with you here because I know you're passionate on this,
Oh
not
boy,
particularly with Yemen coffee in mind, in another time and another place. And you know, sometimes you try and fit a square peg into a round hole, and it doesn't quite work for everybody. Um, we've been through a learning curve at Sheba, and we put, you know, coffee on pieces of paper and looked at it and thought, well, it doesn't look so good. But then when we roasted it, it kind of tastes all right. And it's kind of ugly beautiful, as the Italians might say. Um, what's your view on how Yemeni beans present in the green, whether they're distinctive, and if they are distinctive, is there anything wrong with that, Marty?
So I think wider lens. I think the obsession with the appearance of coffee is a ridiculous concept to begin with. I have never bought a coffee to put in a jar and look at. I buy coffee to roast it, grind it up in little pieces, pour water on top, and drink the liquid. I've never once put it in a pedestal and said, "Everyone, please come over and gaze upon this lovely looking green coffee." So I think it's really a holdover from purely commodified industry. It's not a reasonable, in my opinion, which I share very strongly, is that the physical attributes of a coffee to me should have between little and nothing to do with the value proposition of that coffee, because it's wholly irrelevant when it comes to the final consumer. Consumers do not care. I've never, ever, I've run cafes in 4 or 5 different countries. I've never had a customer come in and order a coffee and then open up my hopper and go, "Oh, those beans are kind of small. You know, forget it. I'm just not interested." Or, "Oh, I think the green may have been ugly, so I'm not going to drink this." It's an irrelevant proposition. So I think not only for Yemeni coffee is ugly. It's little, it's ununiform, it looks horrendous, and to me, that shouldn't be a consideration, not only for Yemeni coffee, but just for all coffee in the world. Even the idea that larger beans are somehow more expensive than smaller beans, when they are demonstratively not different in a cupping table, or potentially smaller beans being higher quality, but still the big beans being expensive. This is just an idea from the 80s that I think as an industry for specialty coffee, we need to get by. When we buy coffee, we do green grading only as a reference or as a way to keep notes, but it doesn't impact any of our purchasing decisions. The problem is it impacts all of our sales decisions, because all of our customers, whether they're buying washed or honeys or naturals, they're wanting to use these archaic systems that were created long before specialty coffee was really even a phenomenon. And so I think we need to challenge some of the aspects of the cupping form that make no sense. Even as a Q instructor, I teach the form, and I think that the system of grading is really, really important, that we have a common language and a common understanding. But I think that there's a lot of elements of the SCA system that are really long past old and need to be, if not thrown out, certainly revised. And so I would say for sure green grading is one of them. Is the green grading system good for washed milds? Maybe it is. I don't know. I don't even really care that much, but it definitely is a tool that does more harm than good when anytime that we're talking about non-wash coffees, whether they're naturals or honeys or some of these weird other things that are happening that don't have names yet. I think that they're trying to put the focus on something that really is quite irrelevant when it comes to what should be the standard in quality and in price setting. So that's my opinion about it. It frustrates me every day. I did 400 tons of non-wash coffees this year in Yunnan and fought every day about this ridiculous green grading system. And I will continue to fight about it. hopefully for not too long. Hopefully it'll change, but if it doesn't, I'll just keep fighting about it.
Well, we've heard powerful advocacy there, gentlemen. Alan, is he preaching to the choir, or are you going to be a dissenting voice and hold up for established practice and orthodoxy? What do you reckon about the way that Yemeni beans look and the way they taste?
I'm going to agree with Martin. I do believe that they're kind of funny beans, kind of hard to work with them. The only thing that I think it's important in terms of physical aspect, well, skipping the obvious defects that we might find in the coffee, is the fact that being ununiform might be slightly tricky to roast them. But except that, I wouldn't find too many issues regarding the say the physical aspect of Yemeni coffees. They are distinct. They obviously tell something about the environment where they grow. And so obviously they will look different if you compare them to, I don't know, to Colombian or something like that, right? Different varieties, different climate conditions, and obviously this will reflect on the physical appearance of the beans. So judging the physical aspect, it's nothing else but judging the environment itself, the microclimate where the coffee bean grew. So as long as we do not have any obvious issues with the beans in terms of defects, I wouldn't worry too much about the fact that they are small, they are kind of uneven, a lot of different shapes in their malformed beans and so on. A new research, and probably everyone knows about this, that apparently there is a kind of a completely different type of coffee in Yemen, the Yemenia type. This might explain as well why, morphologically speaking, it might be different. And this might explain as well why it's so different organoleptic as well compared to the coffees that grow in the region. But nevertheless, as Marty said, the physical aspect should worry us only if we have something very obvious there and something that might have a huge impact on the cup quality. Otherwise, is just judging the fact that coffee grows in a certain area and that's it. Quality-wise, we judge what's in the cup rather than anything else. So yeah, I wouldn't be too much worried about the fact that it's small and say sometimes it has this kind of odd shape, if you want. The only thing that I would worry as a coffee professional, if I would be a coffee roaster and they would be uneven, then that might be a kind of a signal for me that okay, that's going to be a hard candy, a bit of struggle there. But other than that, yeah, pretty say normal beans for considering the context, considering the microclimate where they grow.
Thank you. I mean, John, it does occur to me that if we were to, maybe get in a time machine and go back 250 years, maybe a lot more coffee beans would look more like the Yemeni beans and a lot less like the ones we see today from Colombia or Brazil. And that Yemen being this time capsule and evolving slowly on its own merits, isolated from the larger commercial world, has developed according to the available opportunities, the topography, the lack of moisture and infrastructure for capture of water, the lack of nutrition to the plants, and the lack of knowledge of plant hybridization. So I guess what I'm really asking you, John, is the Yemeni bean true to itself, and should it change in its appearance, and would it be a good thing?
Well, just picking up on a couple of points, and to your point as well, John, just the people questioning a little bit kind of grading standards, and you've got to remember that the grading standards as were basically written around coffee that was 1% of the genetic diversity of Arabica, because sort of Ethiopian coffee was not necessarily, or it was only washed Ethiopian coffee that was originally maybe brought in on that. And Ethiopia as an origin kind of went through exactly the same questions and challenged kind of the status quo of grading systems a few years ago. The Yemeni coffee is now. And I think it's right to challenge that. Screen size, as Alan says, is really important, and there are ways and means of getting around that, because you can do some separation from there. I know the Sheba have separated peabreys off in the past, and with peabreys you have homogeneity of shape as well as screen size that you're going to be able to deal with as a roaster. And going back to the original kind of the question before there about pricing, having the option of peabreys through an auction lot separate from the main one, again gives exclusivity and value to the added value to the end consumer as well. So I think it is good to challenge that. Yemeni coffee is. I find them difficult to grade within a system that maybe wasn't written with the Yemeni coffee in mind. They're a little bit unusual looking. There are what appear to be a relatively large number of immature beans, but when you roast them, they don't come out looking like immatures. The question of Quakers comes in. Occasionally, you will see some Quakers in there. Other countries that do a lot of natural processing, like Ethiopia and Brazil, and natural processing have also struggled with this question of Quaker count within a roasted sample. And I think what's good about coffee science now is that we're in a place now where we can challenge that and say, well, this thing that exists in a grading system, is it important or is it not important? And can I challenge that through science? And I think Lavras University did a really interesting study that just came out. I've lost track of time over the last 18 months, but I think it was kind of the beginning of this year or the end of last year, where they actually looked at roasted samples, and then they would add in a number of Quakers, and then they would look at sensory panels and say, like, at what point does a sensory panel statistically sort of consistently say the number of Quakers in this sample is affecting the sensory profile of the coffee? And it's a surprisingly high amount, and you're looking at 12, 14 Quakers per 100 gram sample or more before a panel can say, oh, this has got kind of a Quakery taste in there. And the Quaker count allowed on the SCA system, and whether it be on a wash coffee or natural process coffee, is much, much lower than that. And I think that is an example of a grading point where you have to question what was the scientific meaning and rationale behind that particular grading point being put in place. So yeah, shape is important, and sort of as Alan was saying, kind of the genetics is a little bit different. So, and I think as farmer sophistication and understanding of the market increases, then they might be able to separate out different plants. So you've got more homogeneity of a particular landrace or cultivar that might have a cup benefit, it might not, but it might give you more homogeneity in the screen size. And sort of a lot of specialty producers, particularly places like Panama, they've listened and they've learned from the end consumer over the last 20, 30 years. And Yemeni coffee farmers haven't had that exposure to the specialty market for so long. So they still got to go through that learning journey and listen and understand what information they want to do take in place, and what they don't, and what they're happy to do and continue to do to make Yemeni coffee kind of that unique and special product that it is.
Thank you very much indeed.